This is Monty, once again back. I haven't done a podcast in a while. And for those of you who appreciate podcasts like I do, sometimes you just don't have time to watch a video or read information. You just rather put your headset on, hop on the train, bus, plane, or something, or carpool, and just listen to the audio. So this is for those people, including myself. So what's going on in Bitcoin? Why is it relevant? What problems does it resolve? Sometimes we're presented with solutions before we actually realize there's a problem. And a lot of you Bitcoiners out there, you probably have situations where you want to explain Bitcoin to people, but those people don't know what the problems are. If we're not aware of the problems associated with the current monetary system and financial system, then those people don't know what problems Bitcoin is designed to fix. So let's focus on some of the problems inherent with the current fiat system and try to figure out how Bitcoin is designed to fix those problems. Okay, for instance, the current fiat system, as we all know, one major issue is that it uses a debt-based system to back up basically the currency. In other words, for every dollar that's issued, our government is liable and has to pay off the Federal Reserve for issuing the currencies. Okay, the fiat dollars are actually an obligation that needs to be paid off to the Federal Reserve. Congress really should have the responsibility of issuing currency that was delegated for some stupid reason over to the Federal Reserve, I think in 1913. So please excuse the wind noise. Of course, I had to walk into the wind tunnels and such where the wind is blowing, distorting the microphone. But anyway, the Federal Reserve is printing money, and that money accumulates interest, which is owed to them, in addition to it being debt-based. So that creates a liability all of its own. So that's one inherent problem. We have a fiat-based system where before we even start using the currency, the entire nation is taking on a liability, and we're paying interest to the Federal Reserve, even though we never asked them or gave them permission to issue currency in the first place. That should have been Congress's responsibility. So that's a major flaw in the system. Improper delegation of authority to issue currency. So that's a no-no right there, and we should all be aware of the fact that we didn't sign on to this, we didn't agree to it, no one talked about the implications or ramifications. So that was just something that was unilaterally agreed upon without our permission. So we have a system based upon the false premises of an agreement that was never presented to the American public. Number two, the idea that the currency itself, the way that the Federal Reserve tries to use the currency to control inflation, help with job creation and all of that, actually is flawed, almost by definition. In other words, the Federal Reserve and the central bankers of the world, they print out a lot of money to either stimulate the economy or contract or slow down economic expansion in order to keep down inflation. Okay, but by inflating or printing, what happens is the existing amount of currency in circulation loses its value. It's almost like you holding a share of stock in a company, and there's a 21 million float of shares, and then someone at the company, at IBM or whatever, Microsoft, whatever, decides to issue 41 million or 141 million additional shares. At some point, there's going to be a tremendous amount of dilution, which is going to decrease the value of your existing shares. So we have the same problem with the dollar. Right now, we have an excessive amount of dollars out there in circulation, and no one has any idea of the total amount and how to regulate the amount of currency in distribution so that we can determine a true value. In other words, it's not pegged to anything. We just have a bunch of dollar bills out there floating around, and nobody has any idea how much is in the hands of consumers, taxpayers, banks, whatever. It's just some weird system whereby the government is like, please trust me, we're going to somehow come up with some sort of intrinsic value to this paper, when in actuality there's no accountability, no backing of gold, no backing of any commodity, no accountability. And then also, see, the banks are very terrible at protecting our privacy. When you have central authorities like banks and Federal Reserve entities, they determine the rules. They determine how our information is going to be treated. In other words, when you open up a checking or savings account at a bank and you fill out disclosures that make sure that they get an abundance of information. I don't care if it's a very small amount of money you put into a bank or a very large amount. They accumulate an abundance of information, and that information is made available to a lot of different other agencies. All they have to do is request it, and Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citibank, whoever, they're going to turn over that information to whoever, IRS, whoever requests it. No questions asked, okay? So, in other words, our information is going into the hands of anybody and everybody who express an interest, because this is like some open type of agreement among the federal government that information is going to be shared. Because, again, the banks being some centralized authority that is able to dictate what happens to our personal information. In addition to our money in the bank, the ownership transfers from us to the bank. When you put your money into the bank, the ownership actually transfers. And we are not allowed as much as we should be able to dictate the terms and conditions in terms of what happens to that money. So we're agreeing to a system of management of our finances once the money, again, is turned over to the bank. So you lose control. They dictate the terms and conditions in terms of what happens. And we have... So anyway, the way that our money is handled once it's put into the hands of the bankers, that's a very serious problem as well. And also the... let me see, the security of the money is another issue. Because there's an abundance of identity-related information associated with the monies we put into banks. Now the hackers and the insiders and different people are able to access a great deal of information. So that's a major compromise that we have to deal with when giving money, again, to centralized authorities who take over the safeguarding of our privacy and our data and our personal information once we hand it over to the banks. And so let's take a look at some of the problems. Those are some of the problems. Now, how does Bitcoin present a solution to the problems? One of the things that we discuss as far as the data is concerned, when we do Bitcoin-related transactions over the blockchain doesn't know and doesn't care who you are, exactly what you purchased, where you live, what your background is, or anything like that, what your age is. It has no bearing on the transaction. The ability for you to send money to me is irrelevant, okay? What's important is that a certain amount of money is transferred back and forth. That's what the blockchain requires, to know how much money and what address is coming from and what address is going to. Other than time and date stamping of that, that's pretty much it as far as ability to connect who sent what and what was purchased and where you live and what country you're from and all that. A lot of that information is obscure. Now, it's not totally anonymous. There are certain cryptocurrencies that are completely anonymous, like Monero, maybe Zcash, maybe Dash, and some of the others. But Bitcoin itself reveals some information, but it's very, very limited. It's probably 5% as compared to credit cards and such. So there's a big difference in terms of what is actually transmitted over from one person to the other, or available for government entities to track and trace. Another thing, we have the decentralized nature of Bitcoin, and that simply means that instead of some central authority saying, "Yeah, give me your money, and I'll do with the money whatever I want to do." If I want to lend it to some country that's oppressing its citizens, or if I want to invest in companies that are harming the environment or promoting child labor in the workplace, or whatever the case may be, we don't have control of that with fiat. But with Bitcoins and such, if we find out that there is, let me see how to put this. When I send you my money, we don't have to worry about a centralized authority dictating what that money is ultimately spent. In other words, if I want to contribute money to a charitable cause, I can make sure that money goes directly to them. It doesn't go to another entity that delegates the money out. So we get rid of a lot of these middlemen. We get rid of a lot of these centralized authorities that are going to somehow get in the middle and more than likely do things with the money that we have where there was no agreement, okay, or to do things. So remember, Bitcoin is designed to cut out the middleman, and we can better screen out nefarious individuals who have ideals and goals and objectives that are counter to our own. And then for security is concerned, the blockchain is what we call an immutable database that once transactions are logged, they can't be reversed. So each chain of the block, or each block that goes into the chain, is time and date stamped, and it's sort of like sealed in place by mining activities. Miners are going to mine these blocks, and those blocks are linked from that point on with all the information there, preserved forever. So in other words, we have a permanent record of all of the details associated with transactions, and they cannot be reversed. The computing power is such that it would take all the supercomputers on the planet. It would take tons and tons of money beyond even the resources of most governments to come up with enough financial resources and technical resources to reverse even a very small transaction for a very short period of time. So in other words, it's not economically feasible to try and go back and reverse these transactions or change them. So this is an inherent quality of the blockchain, and this is why it's so important to make sure that you guys understand the difference between fiat currencies and the regular monetary system versus Bitcoin and the way it operates. Okay? Some other things may be, if you're a merchant, we get to weed out the credit card companies. We don't need to deal with processors. We don't need to deal with all these middlemen that just add fees upon fees and charges upon charges. In other words, as a merchant, if you accept Bitcoin, settlement fees, service fees, batch fees, chargebacks, all of these things become a thing of the past, mainly because we're dealing with customers directly. When a customer patronizes your store, if you're a merchant, they send money directly to you, and you're handling that transaction directly with that customer. So if there's a dispute, the good news is really they can't do a chargeback simply by claiming something that may or may not even be true. So the onus is back in the hands of the two individuals involved, the merchant and the customer, like it was in the old days. And that simply means we have to be responsible as merchants. If we're going to not be responsible, then like a good business person, you're gonna have every incentive to do things correctly. Otherwise, you're gonna get a bad reputation, and you'll lose business. So that's gonna go back to the way it was a long time ago, when responsible merchants got a lot of business, and irresponsible merchants or businesses lose business. So the marketplace typically irons that out on its own, And we don't need to pay MasterCard and Visa and American Express $50 billion, $60 billion, $70 billion a year just to get in the middle of these transactions and dictate the terms and conditions, when most of us business owners already have terms and conditions that are agreed upon with the customers directly when they patronize our businesses. So basically, these middlemen circumvent our own policies on our websites or on our businesses, and we have to, unfortunately, substitute our policies and procedures for the credit card issuers and the banks and all these other third-party entities who don't really add a lot of value to transactions, okay? And then just keep in mind that the idea that the Bitcoin is designed to add a certain amount of value by virtue of the way that it's created. In other words, there's a limited supply, and the more people that buy Bitcoin and own them and use them, taking Bitcoins out of circulation by buying them means that the existing Bitcoins go down. So that tends to drive up the price, drive up the value. So you could have a situation where you actually have more money in your Bitcoin wallet, for instance, at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day as compared to what you had at the beginning of the day. So, a lot of us do experience appreciation when looking at the value of our Bitcoins in terms of what happens from day to day. So there's nothing like having an appreciating asset that acts as a store of value and at the same time is used as a transaction medium, a payment system. And with the implementation of the Lightning Network, SegWit, some of these other protocols built into Bitcoin and being implemented as we speak, we'll find that, once again, we have an alternative to the dollar, to the fiat-based system, such that we've never had before. So take these things into consideration. I'm not going to go into very much more detail, but just remember we have an alternative to the system that we currently use, which is rapidly falling apart. Banks are getting bail-ins and bailouts and freezing accounts and doing know your customers to discriminate against that group or this group or whatever. And a lot of people are really feeling as if the financial system is working against them as compared to working for them. So let's take back control. Take a look at Bitcoin. Go to YouTube. Research Andreas Antonopoulos. That's Andreas Antonopoulos. Research Trace Mayer. Trace Mayer or Meyer. I think it's Meyer. Take a look at the World Crypto Network. Take a look at bite-sized Bitcoins. Go to CoinDesk.com. That's CoinDesk.com, and read the articles. Go to Cointelegraph.com. That's Cointelegraph.com. Read those articles that are published on those sites. Go to Coinbase.com and set up your account. And get your Trezor wallet. Trezor. Get your Trezor hardware wallet from Amazon, for instance. And get your Ledger Nano. Those are the two top hardware wallets, so you can keep your wealth in your own possession. Transfer your Bitcoins and cryptos onto your Trezor or your Ledger Nano wallets, and you hold your private keys. No one can take them away from you. Those are just some of the resources. There's plenty more, but those should get you guys started, okay? So I hope this podcast sheds some light on what's happening in the crypto space and what are some of the problems out there that are currently being resolved. Again, a lot of people, they have to know that there's problems. Sometimes people overlook problems. Some people are just naive or don't understand what the problems are. So when we're educating people about Bitcoin, we need to tell them what the problems are, make them aware of it so they can see and understand, and then we present Bitcoin as a solution to those problems. Okay, so you guys have a great day, and keep talking Bitcoin.